All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. People can jump on. They won't miss too much. Again, we're going to record this so you can go to the website and there'll be a link to get the recording. So again, this is Dan Kinsey. I'm going to try to go through a little bit today about what we've built application-wise that works with Lawson. The Lawson, primarily S3, and a lot of this will be available for Landmark as well. Some of it already is. I want you to focus more on the concept of what we're doing and some of the tools we have, and just, if you think about that coming out for Landmark, that will be available. Currently I have Landmark security reporting, but some of the other products are getting ready to be rolled out here sometime soon. So, I kind of promoted this as increased visibility, decreased risk. So of our applications, I'm really going to try to focus just on those points. So I'm not going to take you through a lot of what our applications do. I'm not going to go through a full demo of those, live demo of those. We can always do that for you. But I really want to focus on 10 or 15, 20 specific points that our customers have come to us on and said, this is what we need for audit concerns. This is what we need to maintain a model. So I want to show you the tools we have for doing that. So I'm just the agenda today, a little bit about us, the solutions, and then kind of what the objectives are. So I won't spend too much time on this. We have been around for 35 years. We've been a Lawson partner for 20 years, over 20 years. And a lot of the tools and solutions that we built are in conjunction with our consultants. So we do a lot of Lawson projects. And to build segregation of duty policies and to build good user access reports, we engage our consultants to tell us really what do we need to do there. So a lot of sharing of knowledge between our technical consultants and our application consultants to come up with these tools. So let me briefly go through just what the products are, and then I'll tell you how they incorporate into what we're doing. So we have a couple ways that we do security reporting, and that would be everything from user reporting, roles, security classes, how they're defined, what the rules are, at all the object levels. So element groups, tokens, programs, system codes, tables. So we'll have our standard reporting, and today I'm just going to focus on really what auditors are generally looking for, what our customers are looking for compliance issues. We then have a kind of a simulation or modeling application that allows you to create what-if scenarios. If I were to make a change to my security model, what is the impact and how many people would be impacted by that change before I actually go ahead and make it? And then security auditing are all the changes that are made to the security model and monitoring that activity to make sure when a change is made in security that somebody is aware of that. Now, going along with those, we have segregation of duties and some monitoring and then some remediation tools on how we would fix violations to those policies. So our SOD, or segregation of duties, comes with pre-built policies and pre-built rules that will work with Lawson now. You can add as many of those as you want. There's a lot of different ways to define them, but we want to initially have you start with something that you could check your model on day one to see if you're compliant to specific requirements that auditors generally have. And I'll give you some examples of those as we go through. Then our monitoring application is where we're looking at activity within the application. So we want to know where people, where they're going in the application, what records they're looking at, what kind of transactions they're processing. And we can use that back with our segregation of duty policies where we can determine the level of risk that we might have within the application. So someone might, in fact, be violating a policy, but they're never using this from security viewpoint, but they're never actually using the forms that are causing the violation. So, if you want, do you really need to go out and make a lot of security changes when in fact the user's never accessing those forms? That would probably be a lower level concern versus someone who's actually using forms that are causing that risk. So that's what we get into with the conflict remediation. And then we can go deeper on those transactions to give you an audit of the actual data that's being changed. So if you want to know at the field level, the journal entry gets changed, we need to know who made the journal entry change, what it was before, the value before, what it was after, that kind of thing. So I'll show you how that works into what we call, being compliance issues. And again, this kind of comes from us doing We've got close to 100 of these these systems implemented, and whereas not all of our clients have everything, they have most of the core products that allow them to do segregation duties and security reporting and monitoring activity. So those are the questions that we're getting from our customers, right? They're getting it for their auditors. Who has access to what is a big one, right? And I need the reports on that. And who's looking at specific information? So it's not just what they have access to, but what are they really doing? And those are kind of the two core questions that our customers come to us with. When we initially do presentations, we like to know what we want to focus on for your group, and we'll ask that question. And almost every time it's, our auditors need to know who has access to what. So that's kind of the big one. So when we increase your visibility, we're trying to give you better options on user access reports, segregation of duty violations, monitoring activity, and auditing these critical processes. Then we use those also to help then decrease your risk. And you can see, we're trying to minimize how users get provisioned, maybe invalid roles or roles that are going to, if they get a role, it's going to create a segregation of duty violation, that kind of thing. We want to monitor for you so you can maintain a compliant model. So we'll look at the tools here that we do this. So on increasing visibility, let's look at 4 separate areas here. Now, we start with our security reporting dashboard. So we have a dashboard that has about 8 different products now. This is just for security reporting. So you can see we do this at the user role and security class level. I won't go into everything that's on here. And we have a lot of user reports. Now, the main criteria behind all these and what we're trying to accomplish are user access reports. What disabled users do we have? What active users do we have? Groups and identities and attributes. So there's different queries that kind of get us to all that information. What I want to focus on for compliance issues generally is what kind of access do my users have? So that could be just at the role level, which a lot of people are looking for, or it can be very granular and get down to, at the form level, what is their rule. So we can produce all those. So the 3 types of user kind of role assignment reports we have is the first one is called our user role matrix. So I can filter this on different ways. If you have Lawson's HR payroll, so you have an employee table, we can tie this back and we can pull in their process level, we can pull in their department. So you can you can filter on and run departmental reports, process level reports by company. Now if you don't have HR payroll, you can still run this, we just wouldn't have that data. And what we're going to do is give you a grid, which is exportable to PDF or exportable Excel, of the roles that are assigned to those users. So it's a great high-level way of just looking at who has actually access to any one role. You can click on any of the column headers on this. This is all done through your browser. So you can click on any of the column headers, and it'll obviously sort them that way and roll all those users to the top based on that role. But and if you obviously scroll left and right, and if you put it in Excel, you're going to get all the columns. But it's just an easy, quick way to look at and do review and audit of what users have what access to what roles, versus potentially looking at a detailed list of all the user role assignments. So we provided this matrix reporting on a number of things: attributes, identities, user roles, and I think user groups. So there's 4 different ways you can get this. This is at the role level assignment. Now, if you need it in more detail, we have a couple ways you can get user groups, user roles also. So we saw the matrix there. We also have a query that will give it to you where the roles are built into one cell, so we concatenate the fields. So if you need to give the name of the roles over to and export this out to Excel, you can do that. Now, there's a couple other fields that are off to the right. The portal role, I think we put in a separate column. You'll have all the groups they belong to. But you can see I'll have, for every user, I'll have a list of all the roles they're assigned to. And this obviously would match up with the grid, but it's just another way of getting this data. So now I can export this and say, here's the roles your user has, however way you want to look at it. We have a lot of people that like this format. Now the third one we provide, and this all just goes back to the main question we get from users is what they have to produce. It's a user role report. So the third one is going to be where I'm going to give you a line for every role. So now I can do things here where I can on our reporting, you can do grouping and sorting. So if I want to know every user that belongs to a particular role, I can do that here by sorting this by role and see every user that has that role. So there's another use for this, what you can't necessarily do with the other ones. So in this case, I'm just going to get a single line for every role. So it's the same data 3 different ways, kind of whatever you find most useful. So that's what we're doing for, we're trying to give you better visibility into and again, we have that for the landmark also. We're trying to give you better access into your security model so you can see what user role assignments are. So then let's look at the other thing we do, which gets much more granular. Now, I could have done a simple row by row, like the former screenshot, of user role security class object, be a form, table, program, category. And if it's at a form level or table level, I can give you the rule behind that. So I can get that row by row. Now, another way we do this, so we can do things like we can resolve conflicts for like least restrictive access. So if a user can get to a form more than one way, Lawson's going to give them the least restrictive access. So, for example, all access is going to override if they have inquiry access through some other method. So when we put this data out to Excel, we put the users in columns, so you can take your users in a department and specify what users you want, line them up side by side, and we'll give you down to the form level what their level of access is going to be. So we resolve that conflict for you. So if you need to review all the way down to the detailed table, form, program, what else, field level, element groups, we have all the information on this report. What's nice about this is that the only thing nice from an auditor's perspective is that we only allow the user on the interface to control who is on the report, but not what data. So if you pick a user, you cannot filter out any of their roles, any of their security classes, any object. When you get into other types of reporting, a lot of times you can build filters, and if you take that filter and export it, it can be misleading as to, is everything about this user on the report? Well, in this format, all we allow you to do is pick the users, and we're going to give you every role. And you can kind of see where I have column G as user F. Nelson. Above them are going to list the roles that they're assigned to. Now, this is actually exportable also to PDF, because that's another concern, that somebody manipulated the Excel document. So because we can deliver it in PDF and in Excel, when you deliver both to whoever's doing your security review or an auditor, they can validate that what's on the PDF is the same as what's in Excel, but the Excel gives them some more versatility on how they want to filter and sort and everything else. So we'll provide at this level as well. So those are really the user reports that we're providing to hopefully give you some increased visibility into how your users are defined. So then let's talk about segregation of duties. Now, we deliver this currently with 240 policies. That number is actually increasing in our next release by another 30 or 40 policies. And what those policies are designed to do is to make sure no one can process fraudulent transactions, right? They can't go in and set up a temporary vendor, enter an invoice, and process a check. We want to prevent that type of activity. So we make sure that people don't have the type of access to the system that allow them to do those functions. Now, it took over 2,000 rules to make sure people don't have access to those 240 policies. That's all pre-built into the application when it's delivered. So we'll allow you then we have a couple things. We'll have a dashboard that'll tell you where you have violations. So you can monitor this on a regular basis. You're allowed to rate each individual policy. So the policies that are most important to you, you give a 5-star rating, and if you violate a 5-star rating in any one of these categories, it's going to show up as red. So the different colors represent either the no violation, it's a disabled policy, or I have one of my 1 to 5 stars. So there can be up to 7 colors that'll show up on this. You can add as many new policies as you want. You can add as many new categories as you want. Policies can be defined at basically any object level. So if you want to compare role to role, make sure a user doesn't have 2 different roles, you can do that. Role to security class, security class to security class, any of those objects you can compare, and we'll tell you if you have a violation. Now, initially, we build these all at the form level because everybody in Lawson starts out with the same forms. So we're very granular in how we check this. But we'll have a number of customers that will come back and just make sure that a user doesn't have 1 of 2 different or 3 different roles, right? They just can't have those assignments. So it doesn't have to be just 2 layers. It can go 3 or 4 layers deep if you want. Now, So you can watch this dashboard on a daily basis. It gets updated and tells you where you have violations. So now the policies, the way we define them, and you can kind of see here on this screen that you have these yellow stars, and that's where we do the 1 to 5 star rating. You can check, you can enable or disable the policy. And then when you look at the editing policy, the way we build those is we use and or logic. So I don't have to build 22 individual rules. If I'm looking at the ID number 3 here, it's telling me that if you have AM 40.1 or AM 145 and you have any of the other 4, and again, it has to basically be more than inquiry access, that's a violation. So we're actually doing 8 rule checks on this one policy. So that's how we can have 2,200 rules checked against our 240 policies. So again, you can add a third tier to this. You can build this by any of the objects that I mentioned before, the tables, roles, security class programs. So when we build these and when we deliver them, what we're going to do is we're going to run a report. Now there's a lot of different ways you can decide what you want on this report. Do you just want one category? Do you want specific policies? We allow you to set up notifications. So if you have 4 policies in finance that are critical that you need to monitor, then what we'll do is you'll define a report with those 4 policies, and you'll put it on an email notification schedule. The system can check every night, every week, every month, however, whatever the frequency you want, and it'll run a report, and it'll email a report to whatever users you want of violations that have occurred. So when we produce the report, we're gonna give it to you basically in the grid format of how a T-chart of how you built the policy, and give you what's on the left and what's on the right. This is by user. So this is Frank Nelson. He validates Asset Management Policy 1. Give you the description of the policy, and we'll give you the access that he has, and the available function codes, and what his rule is, and why he's in a violation. So he's in violation because he shouldn't, if he didn't have AM 270, because it's in the list here that you can see me pointing to, if he has any one of these and the ones on the left, that's a problem. So in this case, I'd either have to give Frank inquiry access only to AM 270, or I'd have to take that out of a security class. However, that might impact other people, right? So I have to be aware of that. Well, we're going to deliver these to you. The reason they're blue here specifically is because you can drill to our reporting from here. So if you have our security reporting and you want to know, tell me every security class that AM 270 lives in, I can tell you that. If you want to know what more is in AM analysis security class, I can tell you all the forms in that. So it'll link and launch our reporting automatically with those filters. But what we're trying to provide here is a report. Now this can be printed out. You can export this to Excel. We actually provide this in a zip file, the 4 different reports we provide. So if you have someone who doesn't have access to run these, but you want them to review them, just send them the zip file. They'll get, I think, 3 HTML versions and an Excel version. So this reporting, again, can be automatic if you just set it up on a schedule. Save your report with your parameters and set it up on a schedule. Now, additionally, we provide in the Excel kind of a high-level grid of where your violations are. So it can be a little overwhelming in the beginning to know, I have all these people that have all these violations, right? So I can look at it by violation, tell me the people, or I can look at it by person and tell me their violations. But when I look at it in Excel, I can get a grid here of all my users, all my policies that I ran this report for, and X would tell you where I have a violation. So it's just it's a way to develop a starting point on, boy, what's our most important policies? Let's look at the users that are actually using those and determine, how do we attack this issue? Well, we'll provide this violation matrix as just part of our standard SOD reporting. So now we've looked at ways we're trying to help you with user role reporting, and again, that can be down all the way down whatever object. We looked at segregation of duties and how we're identifying where you have potential issues there for creating transactions you don't want. And now we look at how do we monitor activity. So we have a couple ways to do this. And I'd say for the most part, most of our clients will pick up the monitoring application even if they don't go the layer deeper to transaction auditing. And I'll explain the difference to you. So the monitoring tool is really a footprint of everywhere every user has been in your system and everything they've done. So when I want to run a query of what they've been doing, I can look by user, by form, date and time, which action they took on that form. It can be any inquiry. It doesn't have to just be changes. So this is inquiry as well, and what record that they worked on. So if you have a user that views a certain employee record, I can tell you that. If they change the record, I can tell you that. Anything they did in the application can be done through an add-in, as long as it's using Lawson's AGS calls. It can be an add-in, it can be a process flow, it can be a third-party tie-in if you're using AGS calls, and it can be anything done in Portal. So I can then, by using the technology we have in this reporting, I can filter this down to what happened on a day, what happened on a user, tell me everything about a specific form, tell me every change made to GL40 by a particular user. Any way you want to filter this by any of these columns, we can do that. We have customers that capture currently over 100,000 transactions a day run through their system. You have retention policies you can define, but they'll keep millions of transactions, so they can always go back when the question is asked, who made a change to this record or who was looking at this record? And that's what this data will give you. We use this in a lot of other areas within our application, but primarily when you need to know on critical forms and sensitive forms, who's looking at it and who's working on it, we have that information. Now, if you need to go a level deeper than that, then we can audit those transactions. So the difference is we have the data that's behind each one of those transactions. Now, we don't have any client that audits everything in their system. What they do is they focus on the critical forms that they want to audit. They want to know every GL journal entry that gets changed. They want to know, right? Some of the master file stuff you have within Lawson. What we have the ability to do, and those are great audits. They do, I don't know, 25 or 30 different audits. We can audit any of the 7,000 forms that are in Lawson. And what we are able to do is, because we can pull any of these reports by user, I can tell you every transaction a user worked on during the day. It doesn't matter where it was in. I don't have to go in and run audit reports from different places. I can run them by user. I can run them by date. And in this case, what I asked for was a query of every change that was made over a certain date range, and I can expand this more button, and I can see exactly what was changed. So this is a GL journal entry that was changed from 1,500 to 1,700. And I know the line items that were changed, and I know who changed it. It was done by, well, the Lawson user. I know the date and the time it was changed. And if I wanted to see all the data that was on that form, we have the ability to do that. So you can see just the fields that in fact changed, or you can see everything. And that's just how I clicked one of the options when I ran the report. Now you can always export these to Excel, export them to PDF, but what we're trying to do is give you the option to define, the 50 critical forms or the people that you want to audit. So we'll get clients that want to audit a department. So anything, maybe there's a support group you have that are not supposed to be making changes, but they have full access to the system. Well, you can audit that group of users for everything they do in the application, and maybe only audit for adds, change, and deletes. So if they're doing inquiries, that's fine. But if they're making any changes to the system, we'll pick up those transactions. So defining those rules are something you can do very easily. We pre-built about 70 different audit trails behind the current Lawson processes, but it's very easy just to say, I want to audit everything for Dan Kinsey across the board on the production product line or in production, and just give me all, and just for changes, and you'll get those reports. So we're trying to give you this capability of auditing everything that goes on within the application. So that's how we're increasing your visibility into what's going on when you're getting these questions. We want you to be able to answer them quickly. Who looked at the transaction? Who changed the transaction? What was the transaction behind that? What user roles are assigned, right? Who has violations? Does anybody violate specific critical policies? You'll now have all that visibility into the system. So now, using that, to decrease risk. So we want to look at how do we fix these SOD policies, and how do we minimize assigning roles incorrectly to a user? How do we make sure we don't do that and violate SOD policies going forward? That's what we want to help you with. Let's talk about our SOD remediation grid. Now this is similar to what I showed you with the Excel. The Excel simply showed you that you had violations to policies, but it didn't tell you if they were critical violations. Now we determine that based on user activity. So what I'm able to show you here is everywhere that you see a colored square means it's a violation to a policy. I had to dim out the users because this is from an actual user system or client system. So this is where they have violations. Now, I can filter this down and say, I only care about my 5-star policies, or I only care about my closing procedures, and you can squeeze this grid in and focus on what you want to work on. But the green indicate that the user violates the policy, but they've never used a form on either side of the grouping of how that policy is defined. So when I go back to the one that had like, AM 145 and AM 270, they've never used those forms. So yes, they're in violation, but you know what? They're not using any of the forms in Lawson, so it's probably pretty low risk. The yellow tells me they've used a form on one side of that grouping. Now that's generally okay, right? Because we can allow them to use it on one side. It's both sides that we care about. So that's lower risk, but something that ought to certainly be looked at more closely. And the red indicates that they're using forms on both sides of that grouping. So they are doing vendor maintenance and they are doing invoice entry. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean they're doing anything wrong, but it means they have access and they are using those forms. Now, what I'm able to do here then is I can actually click on any one of these cells, and we're going to take you to kind of a simulation and modeling screen. Say, okay, how would I fix this thing and who's impacted by me fixing this? So on the left-hand side would have been one of the red squares that I clicked on, and it's going to tell me that, this would be for a particular user, and it's going to lay out how they get access to this form and what their access is and how many times they've used it. So I can see the one I have here, AM 20.4, for probably estimated books. They have full access and it's got a 1 beside it. And I see some down below that have 2 beside it. So that's why it's red, because they're using something on both sides. I can click on those numbers and actually drill into our monitoring tool and tell you exactly what they're doing. Now, an inquiry, again, we don't care. So these are going to be change records or add records that they've done. So we'll drill into that activity so you know exactly what they're working on. When you actually click on the form itself here on the left, we're going to bring up a grid on the right, or a list, of all the users that have access to that form and what level of access they have. Because it isn't as simple as just changing access on that form to inquiry, because that could impact a whole bunch of people. So we give you different methods in our modeling tool to say, what if I were to, what if I change it to inquiry? What if I remove it from the class? What if I get rid of the class from the role? What if I get rid of the role from the user? Right? Different things you can try to say, if I were to want to fix this problem, how would I go about doing it versus just going into security and start making changes and running new reports and to see what's going to happen. We can tell you whether or not making that change is going to fix that problem. When you make that change, we'll repaint your grid for you and tell you if we resolve the problem. And what our customers find is that by making one change, it fixes the problem for a dozen people. So it's a way to do, and again, this is all in simulation. We're not actually making these changes. Once you can refresh this and start again. Once you have it the way you want, you print out an audit report, and we'll tell you these are the changes somebody in security needs to go in and make, and it'll resolve these problems. So that's what we're trying to do here on maintaining this, decrease your risk, maintain this going forward. Now, additionally, there's a couple of things we want to do when you start assigning roles to users or making role change assignments. So the first thing we can do is we can go into our SOD our SOD reporting product, and this is standard part of SOD. And when you run a report, you can tell it, I don't really want to run a report by user, I want to check roles. So you can check any individual role to see if it passes policies. You can combine any number of roles and see if the combination of those roles would, in fact, pass the policy. You can also pick a user, and when you select a user, and it's hard to see here, what it does is it checks off the roles that that user already has, and then you can check off the next role that you're going to assign this person and run the report. And so if the user had been cleaned up and they didn't have any violations, before you give them a new role assignment, you can make sure they're not going to be in violation. Same thing if you build a new role and you want to make sure it's compliant in HR, build the role, come over here, select the role, and run it against the HR payroll policies, and we'll tell you if that role on its own is compliant. So that's one thing we want you to be able to do before you just build a role and assign it to somebody. Oh, and here, I did the screenshot then would come back, and it runs the same reports, only if you'll see at the header, it says it's running it for, performed a task against AC accountant and AC data entry, and it found problems. So, we probably want to fix those before we move forward with that. Now, the other thing we'll allow you to do is more extensive modeling. And this is where I can add a role to a user, remove a role from a user, add a security class to a role, remove a class from a role, those types of things you might normally do. Now, we also have this, and I'm not going to go into it today, but we have this also at the object level. What if I added, for instance, what if I added a specific form to a security class? Who's impacted by that? If I did that, show me all the users are going to get impacted by that, and will it change their current security? Because you might add an all access to AP 10.1, add it to a class, and find out that a number of users that had less than full access now have all access. So we'll tell you if you're going to either change the rule on a form, who's impacted. If you're going to add that form to a new security class, who's impacted. Even if you were to delete that form from a security class, we'll tell you what the impact of that's going to be and what users are hit. So you can simulate at that object level, table, program, category, token, at a detailed object level. What we're going to do here, and that's the first circle here, we have roles and security classes to say, what if I add this role to the user? What does that do to their security? So we'll have an interface that will allow you to say, pick your user, and what role do you want to add or what role do you want to remove? Right? We can do that. Or if you have a security class, tell us if you have a role, what it says task. Well, what role do you want, or what security class do you want to add, or what security class do you want to remove? When you do that, we're going to come back into Excel and give you a report. So if you did this by user, we're just going to give you that user. If you did it for role and you did something with the security class, we're going to give you every user that currently has that role. And what we're going to highlight for you in this Excel document is it's going to be red, green, or blue. So if it's red, it means you've now removed access to a form for that user. And again, we do this with tables, forms, programs, elements, fields, anything, right? Element groups. So a blue is going to indicate there's a change to their security. So somehow by doing this, I've changed their security. That's what's going to happen. And if it's green, you've now added security. So if you want to add a role to a user, you can simply go out here in our modeling, pick the user, pick the role, add it, run the report, and you can scroll down through your Excel document, and if it shows up green, that's everything you just gave them access to. If it shows up blue, that means you overrode their access. So whatever they had before, it's been changed and it's been upgraded to something else. And that's what happens here. If there's no change or it's downgraded, we don't have to highlight that. But we do for any upgrade. And of course, obviously, if you remove a role or remove a security class from a role, you're going to get some reds because now people are going to lose access. So it goes back to the same concept of you got to maintain this. Once you get this model right, you got to make sure it doesn't get messed up as you continue to move forward. When you actually make this assignment, you can run an SOD report from here. So I've got this where I've got the user, they've got the access I want, but is that going to mess up my SOD stuff? So there's on the prior screen, I don't know if they have it on there or not. Let me go back a page. Yeah, well, oh yeah. Well, no, there's a SOD option when you go to run the report. So when you can then check to say, okay, if I were to make this change, does that mess up any of my policies? It's all a matter of getting to, getting the model right and then maintaining it that way. So that kind of goes along then with security auditing. As you know, any change to security can completely, blow up the SOD model. So we want to monitor these changes. So there may be critical forms that you always want to monitor, or roles, or user role assignments. Somebody may want to know, anytime a user's role assignment changes, I want to know that. If they want to know a role security class assignment changes, I want to know that. You can build those reports easily within our application and set them up as alerts or notifications. So you can have those sent out, every day, every hour, every week, whatever you set this, every month, whatever you set the schedule up. And we will send off a PDF or Excel document of those changes. You can obviously go in and run them at any time. So this is kind of our screen. There's a lot of ways to do wildcard searches. I can just go in and say, I want to know every change that impacted Dan Kinsey. So it might be an attribute or a a role assignment or something that was on an identity or an attribute that was on my record. You can also track any changes to role, security class, all the way down to the before and after values of these, and set them up as notifications. And again, do these wildcard searches where it just goes across the board and gives you every change ever made within the LS admin tool. So we want you to have this so that you can get notifications, and if you get one, we want to set up both SOD rules on a schedule and security on a schedule, so that if the security change causes a problem with SOD, you get a notification of both. That's what we're trying to accomplish. So a couple other ways then, we have a few more reports, and then we're going to wrap this up because no reason to keep you an hour if we don't have to. So I get into historical changes. So we saw specifically how I can look at an audit on an exact change at a point in time. But we also have customers that go through security reviews. So they'll do this review every 6 months or once a year. Once that gets signed off on, and a lot of times it's just at the user role level, once that's signed off on, they'll have to review it again the next year. Well, it's quite a bit of work to go through that process. So what we'll allow you to do is to go back and we take snapshots, what we call a snapshot of your security model, at any point in time you want to take it, and as many as you want to take. So if you just want to take one on January 1st, set it up on a schedule, we'll take a snapshot of that, of the security model, and then any time during the year, you can compare your current security model to that point in time. So if you're going back, if you do a security review and it gets approved, you want to lock in that security model. So you can do a couple things. You can always go back and run the reports as they would have looked at that point in time, or you can compare your current security to those reports, and we'll tell you what's different. So you can do that at any level. So if it's just at the user role level, I'll tell you for every user what was added or what was removed. If you want to do it at this case, this snapshot is more at the form level, and I'm actually telling you a rule that changed. Now, this is between when I took my snapshot and what it is now, and that's why I have columns that start with C and columns that start with H, because the H is the historical snapshot. If I want to know the detail, like who did this and when was it done, well, that's what security auditing is for. So I go out and say, show me everything that changed on AM00.1. I want to know when the rule was changed and who made that change. But this gives me a nice way of just turning over a change report only to somebody that has to review security. Or if anybody has any questions on how did this get changed or when was this changed, and we have all that data behind these two different methods of finding that information. Now, some other things that come up, and again, maintaining this and making sure you're keeping the model the way that your auditors are going to want this. One is going to be users active but terminated. So, we have the ability to currently list out all your disabled. So when you go in and you flag them as is disabled, we'll give you the ability to go in and run either an attribute report or an identity report of all those users that have been disabled, because we generally won't have them in our other active reports. Sometimes, though, that doesn't happen. They get terminated in Lawson, but they don't get disabled. That's not uncommon for that to be a request that you might have to produce. So what we'll do is we'll give you a list of users that still have an active login in Lawson, but they have a terminated record in the employee file. So we'll give you the termination date. This is test data. Well, termination date, the employee status, so you can now easily produce that report. Now, we're also going to give you their last activity. So it's pretty common that we've seen where our customers want to know, it's kind of asked as last login date. Well, we don't track and capture the logins because we don't want to interrupt that process. But we know the last thing they actually did. So if they logged in and didn't do anything, we wouldn't know that. But if they did any form activity, any inquiry, anything on the system, we know the last form they were on and the date and the time, the last time they did it. So this has been sufficient to turn over for our clients to their auditors of, this is the last time any of these users were active in the application. Right? So it's their last activity. Now, we also get the who is set up in the system that isn't doing anything. We have those also. So this is users with no activity, and we'll give you what their roles are, but they don't have an activity to track, so I can't tell you, they haven't been anywhere, right? So we'll tell you who the users are, what their roles are, and the fact they've never been active. Again, and not an uncommon question to have. We also have, what do we have? We have user security versus activity. So now this is where we combine user security with what they're doing in the application. So when you want to look at tuning your security to take privileges away from users, you can really determine whether or not they're even using it. So if you monitor their activity for a number of months, and you're gonna go in and you're gonna start modifying some classes, you got to know whether or not in roles do people even use this. We have a way of matching up what their actual security is to what their actual activity is. So you'll see that hits column on the right, and I'd have a bunch of zeros. If you want to know how they're using, you can click on the number, and we'll drill you into the activity and show you that they're using it as maybe they're only doing inquiries, right? Or maybe they're doing add, change, deletes. We'll tell you everything that they've done on that form. But the idea is I can come back and show users that I'm going to take this away from you because you never use it because I'm tracking your activity. And you can start tuning your model and making it a little tighter on user access. Now, along with that, we have what we call users lacking security. And this was an interesting one that came from a customer. So what they have users that they think have been using a form, but they can see that they don't have access to that form. Well, they really don't have any easy way to go back and tell where they turn on or off. There is auditing in Lawson, so they could dig through those audit logs, provided they had logging turned on. But what we can do is we can go back, and they didn't have any snapshots, right? They couldn't go back to a prior security to see whether or not they had it in the past. What we can do is we can tell you if the user has had access to these forms in the past and see what the activity is, or we can actually tell you, in this case, the users that currently do not have access but have used this form. So if you're trying to figure out, boy, I've looked at everybody has access, we can't figure out who made this change, we've talked to every user, I can tell you the users that did use it but don't have access currently. And that's what this is for. So it's activity lacking security. So we'll do that as well. I think that might be, yeah. So, we think about, we went through a lot of stuff there, right? But again, I didn't want to focus on all their other reports, how all stuff comes out, how the reporting works. I wanted to focus on the things we think can help you to either build or and then maintain a model that you're going to be able to answer questions when you get those from management or from auditors, right? What are my user roles? Are they being changed? Who's making those changes? That kind of information. But our clients, I think, will tell you that the amount of time it has saved them to generate these reports is, numerous hours on getting this information. And a lot of this information, they have no access to at all. You can't get an audit report of who made the change to a journal entry. You can't get an audit report of who looked at an employee record, right? You can't get it. So not only has it been able to give them information they couldn't get in the past, they now get information a lot more quickly. And when we get into things like reports we turn over to auditors, because we resolve that least restrictive access, I don't have to give an auditor a report that says that they'll see the user has access. One way is add change, one way is inquiry, and one way is all access, and say, well, what kind of access do they get, right? We resolve those. We'll tell you exactly what access they get. And if they have ways of getting there through add change one method and delete another method, we roll them together, just like Lawson would, and we say they have add change, delete access. So we're trying to save you a significant amount of time on putting these reports together, and also give you the tools that you can answer these quickly and have the ability to answer them. That's really what we're trying to do. And so I won't read all these to you, but we're trying to make your life easier. All these products, now SOD remediation is a little different because it does require segregation of duties and require monitoring, and it requires modeling. But every application we have runs on its own. So we have clients that just get LS reporting and they get SOD, or we have clients that just run SOD, right? So or monitoring or transaction auditing. So any of these are standalone, but as I think you've seen through here, they all will work together. So they're nested, so you can drill from one application to another and kind of figure out how you want to do your modeling. How do I want to see the activity by user? If they have activity, I want to see what kind of security they have. Any of that information we'll draw together. So that's really all I have for you today. We're only going to keep you 45 minutes. It's not too bad. I can certainly stay on and answer questions. I could show live product if anybody wants to stick around, or if you want to put anything on the chat board. So I'll stay on the phone for the next 10 minutes, and I'll unmute, and if somebody has a question, feel free to speak up. and thanks for joining us.